Growing up in the 60s, my father was much too young to be drafted during the war in Vietnam. He was too young to even remember the time before his brother was shipped off to join the military efforts in Vietnam. But once his brother returned, he knew something was off. Soldiers called it shell shock, though we now identify it as post-traumatic stress disorder. Henry, like countless others, was a casualty of war in a way that reached beyond a young death in a jungle. The war came home with him, and Henry took his own life in 1978. Henry became a recluse and a serial drunk upon his return, often refusing to talk about his time in the military. The following are excerpts from a personal journal that was found in his belongings. My father held onto this book for decades, but could never stomach the thought of reading it. Maybe he was right. February 24th, 1978. Cold day today. Woke with a bitter taste in my mouth and pain in my back. Had a nightmare. The same one as usual. I'm back in that hell. Cut off from the platoon. Gotta cut through 15 miles of man-eating insects and poisonous jungle towards Saigon. Maybe I can catch up with the team. Can feel eyes on my back from every angle, and the trees are speaking a language I don't understand. I scraped up a couple of useful phrases during the war, but I could never get the hang of Vietnamese. I hear the screaming wings of mosquitoes the size of fists. The screeching of even more mountainous cicadas clung to the trees. It eats at me with suspense. I swear I could hear the screams of women between them. Suddenly, I cleared the trees. I don't recognize this village. Damn fool I am. Can't read the signs? I wander this empty village, lost for words. I passed what must have been a bar when I saw the thing watching me. Looked like the shape of a man. Large clouds of cigarette smoke funneled slowly from his mouth and wrapped about him, before drifting listlessly in the thick summer air and dissipating. I locked eyes with him for a second. He turned and walked off into an alley. I had a momentary lapse of reason and chased after him. I call out to him in silence and received nothing. As I rounded the corner into the alley, a VC gorilla leaps out of the darkness at me, sticks a revolver in my face, and turns my eyeball into a cloud. A red, wet cloud. That's when I woke up. Think I need more pills. February 25th, 1978. Slept terribly. Hungover. Same dream. Saw Hank for his birthday. Felt like he barely recognized me. At least we weren't fighting. Started getting sick. Had to leave. Visited Ted. Spent what I could on pills. He was concerned. Isn't his responsibility, I told him. Backed off. He's a good guy. Saw a ghost. Looked like a woman. Stared at me from a parked car. Her face was blurry. Smudged. Like my eyes knew it wasn't meant to see it. Seen a lot of ghosts since I've been home. February 26th, 1978. Different dream. Shady bar somewhere in Lowe's, the type that working girls flock to for easy money from the Americans. Never was much interested in the services. Friend of mine had caught something nasty on his first tour. Killed him. Walked into the smoky thick air of the building. Sweat clinging to my face and chest. Empty room, it seemed. Bartender stared at me. Couldn't see his face. Too dark. Stumble up to the bar. The bartender says something I fail to understand, and as I approach I get my first good look at him. A bullet had torn through his cheek and severely exposed teeth and muscle. A second bullet had stricken his eye and caused it to bloat and erupt with hideous yellow pus and fluids. It sat amidst a larger mess of purple and red gore. that made up the upper right corner of his head. He spoke again. "See you soon, pal." Woke up after that. Couldn't find the pills I bought. Settled for several bottles of liquor. Missed the dope and Sagan. Pissed the day away in a haze. February 28, 1978. Lost a few days. Must have been a blackout. Too much to drink. Woke up in the cold outside. I was laying in a hole dug about 1.5 feet into the dirt in a backyard. Had dead candles and an arrangement of half-drunken whiskey bottles around me. Looked like a burial site. Saw a couple of those back in the war. Saw a little too much death back then. Still doesn't fail to put me on edge. I've been dry maybe 12 hours and want to puke. Not sure if I can keep up with my own habits. March 1st, 1978. Had a different nightmare. It felt like I'd woken into the dream, shocked by my bedside lamp being flicked on. It was the man from the bar. In this moment, up close, his wound appeared to be much more wet and grave. Muscle pulled and throbbed under the open air, between bone and flesh, sliding unnaturally and yet in a way that must have been natural. I was no medic. I'd never seen muscles like that in action. He wore a pale blue suit, black tie, yellow undershirt, all with black pinstripes except for the tie, which had yellow pinstripes. A massive trailing stain of blood and bits decorated much of the front of his suit. His right shoulder almost entirely coated. The blood glistened and gleamed under the blue light, peeking in through the blinds. He smoked a cigarette tucked between bloody fingers as he leaned back in a chair and gazed at me callously, malice in his eyes. I suddenly had a thought which felt revelatory in the moment, which should have been obvious. I know this man. Well, knew him. At least, his face was familiar. I couldn't place where, but I had indeed seen him before. He stood before me regardless, bits of eye and skull showing in all their respective glories. He spoke. "Transmission from the dead, pal." I choked out a, "Who are you?" "You killed me." He said it so bluntly, it hit my head like a rock. There's no way I could have killed him. I killed plenty, but only in the war. I could tell through the disfigurements that this man wasn't Vietnamese. I was stricken mute in disbelief. He chuckled coldly and said, "Typical." He retrieved a shiny silver revolver from his coat and pointed it straight at my chest. "We're going for a walk, pal." The walk into the desert lasted seemingly for hours and sobered me to dull aches that made me feel like I was fully awake. I couldn't have been awake, could I? Dead people don't talk or show up in your room with a gun. Must have been a convincing nightmare. A terror, maybe. My feet felt as if they were bleeding. We stopped for a while, reaching the end of a row of shallow dug graves tucked into the desert. The series of superficial tombs extended far into the dunes, far beyond my sight. He ordered me into the closest grave. I was in no position to argue. We both stared out into the purple hue of the desert night for a few moments, while the man puffed his cigarette. You know, I was so close to achieving my life's work, my masterpiece. He took a final drag from his cigarette and flicked it into the grave to the right of me. Do you know how long it took me to spill that much red paint? I would have been a myth housewives tell their daughters about to keep them docile. He turned suddenly, and his body language became more erratic and loose. Not like his smooth demeanor previously. He looked right at me. Do you know how hard it is to choke a woman to death, pal? You took it all from me. He appeared grim under the oppressive dark of the night. He clicked back the hammer of his revolver, and it glimmered faintly. He came much closer and kneeled to my face. "All gone in seconds because of you." My mouth hung open, couldn't speak. He scoffed at me and stood up, pointed the revolver right in my face, told me, "Keep playing ignorant. Doesn't matter. You'll find out soon enough." Then he watered the desert with the contents of my head. I woke up in the shallow hole in the backyard again, feet bloody, headache, starting to loathe sleep. March 2nd, 1978. Caught some sleazy murderer show last night. New Mexico Ripper, few years ago. Guy used to strangle women, cut them up, sent letters to the cops. Never caught. Funny coincidence considering. My days are running out. I thought I saw the man from the bar at the end of the hall. Mind playing tricks. Found cigarette ash and remains seared into bedside table. Don't smoke. Haven't slept. The liquor is running thin. I'm loathing the next few days. March 3rd, 1978. I saw him last night. He came to me. Flesh, blood, the whole bit. There's still some of him on the floor. Told me he'd grown impatient. Said the vengeful ghost shtick was a little too slow burn for him. I'm inclined to agree. Sick of this haunted house show. He threw his cigarette down and smeared it into the carpet with his foot. Then, he took that shiny revolver and beat me in the head with it. Head still bleeding, this was real. Slipped into a dream of things all too familiar. Smoky crowded bar, crippling paranoia, judgment, sensory extremes in all angles. I fall in and out of my body at odd pace. I'm becoming sick. I rush through the assortment of blurry-faced creatures writhing about each other and sipping their medication. I emerge into the fresh air and immediately vomit, the sensation of nausea continuing to slip its cold grasp into my skull. I feel my throat screaming to pull itself inside out, to escape the sensation. I feel myself stumble into a stranger, and my hazy staggering. He pushed me backward, and the adrenaline took over for me. It was over before I could even know it started. Instinct drove my hand to my hip, snatching my pistol from its resting point and jamming it into the guy's cheekbone. It rained teeth. I couldn't control my arms. Reflex drove back the hammer and fired the second bullet into his eye socket, shredding his face open. Then the third. Funny to say, I didn't recognize the man until I destroyed his facial structure. I recognized him now. I recognized the feeling in my gut when I'd seen him the past few nights. By the time the full realization had soured in my gut, I was pulled from the dream. Woke up in the yard again, in the grave. Found the man's revolver in the kitchen. Left a note for me too. "See you soon, pal. I won't let him come for me. He can't have me. Not if I can get myself first. I won't be the property of some woman-killing coward. I own my own fate. I earned my right to die. He won't take that from me." There would be no entry for March 4th, as Henry committed suicide by a self-inflicted gunshot wound in the early hours of the morning. Entries in the journal are believed to be trauma-related delusions, though police investigations have drawn comparisons between a homicide in the New Mexico area sometime in the early 70s and the murderer described in Henry's final entry. Henry would have lived in the area at the time, living with my father's family before shutting himself away. Police say a similar weapon was used, as well as the injuries which were described with great accuracy. No further statements were given, and it all quieted down by the time I was born. Can't help but wonder, what really happened on the 4th?